An important part about histograms and being able to use them to find information and organize information is understanding the vocabulary behind it. So we're going to talk about the vocabulary today. We're going to start out with what a histogram is. So a histogram is a graph. So I want you to go ahead and write a graph. In fact, I'm going to use a smaller pencil so I can fit more. So it's a graph, and it is a graph that displays data. So it's a graph. I want you to write that. That's the first thing we know about a histogram, that it's a graph, okay? And it displays data. That means it shows data. So just like a line plot displayed data, this is displaying data. That displays data. So I want you to go ahead and write that down. It's a graph, and it displays data. And this data is grouped in ranges. So a graph that displays data that is grouped in ranges. And I'll show you in a minute what that means, okay? In ranges. So what I would like you to do is I want you to get your highlighter out. So if you have to pause the video, go ahead and do that. So when we talk about a histogram, I want you to highlight it's a graph. That's important. And a graph is always used to display data. So that's like a given, okay? We have some numbers, we have some data, we're going to put it into a graph. But the most important part, and if you want to use in different color, you can, it's grouped in ranges. And you saw that in the video, how these bars are stuck together, where on a regular bar graph, they're not stuck together, they're separate, okay? So go ahead and write that piece down. And then we'll talk about the next pieces. So a histogram is a graph that displays data that is grouped in ranges. All right, so let's talk about what ranges are, okay? So ranges, or intervals if you want to call them, you'll hear both of those words. This is a group of numbers. So a group of numbers. It's a group of numbers. For example, we'll put one here, like 0 to 5. Okay? It's a group of numbers. So again, when we talk about group of ranges, if you want to highlight this, this is a group. Okay? And here are the ranges right here. So you're going to want to highlight that with your highlighter, and then you're going to want to draw an arrow. Okay? So let's write these ranges out. The first one for that bar is 135 to 140. So we're going to write that range just so that you can see that as an example. Okay, so when we say that a histogram displays data, it does. It displays numbers, but these numbers are grouped in ranges or in intervals. Okay, so I want you to, and the ranges are always at the bottom of the graph on the x-axis. Okay, that's an important part. Let's talk about a bar. Since we're right here, we might as well start talking about the bar. So a bar, it's a part of the histogram. It's a part of the histogram, so go ahead and write that down. A bar is a part of the histogram that shows two things: the range okay, just like what we talked about on the bottom, and on the side, the frequency. I'll show you what I'm talking about. I'm going to get a yellow highlighter, so you might want to get the same. And I'm going to get a red highlighter. Okay, I'm going to highlight this middle bar right here. See this right here? This middle bar. Okay, so now I'm going to draw an arrow to it. make sure you're drawing these arrows. The last notes I saw, some people didn't draw these arrows, and it's really important, okay? So that's an example of a bar. It tells the range, which is between 150 and 155, and the frequency, which is 8. Okay, so it tells both things. The bar shows the range and the frequency. The range is 150 to 155, and the frequency is 8. So now you're probably wondering, well, Ms. Hernandez, what does frequency even mean? Well, that's an important question, so let's answer that next. That's our last vocabulary word. Frequency, you guys have heard this word before, how frequent or how often something occurs. So when we talk about frequency, we say how often something occurs or something happens. Or you can say how many data points are in the set. If you're like, I'm not sure what you're talking about, remember in our dot plots how we would have data points like this? That's what it's talking about. This is just a different way to look at it. So this is from our old example, those dot plots, but now frequency, I want you to get your highlighter. Frequency, it just shows it in a different manner. Okay, so make sure you draw your arrow here. So frequency is like how many dots or how many data points we have. And I'll give you an example right now. You've already seen one example that I used earlier, but I'll give you another one. Okay, our frequency for students that weigh 100 to 145 pounds, that's 5 students. 5 students weigh between 100 and 145 pounds. Write that down. In this case, only 2 students weigh between 135 and 140 pounds. What about this one? The kids that weigh 140 to 150, or 145 to 150, are 6 students. Over here, the one that weighs 155 to 160, it's only 3 students. Right? And then the last one, the students that weigh 160 to 165, looks like only 1 student. All right? So this is just another way. We used to count the dots for our dot plots. Now we're just going to look at frequency to see how many we have. Okay, so what I want you to do is make sure you have all your vocabulary written on your paper. This is extremely important. If you didn't draw arrows and do everything that I did, I want you to go back and fix all of that, because you're really going to have to know the names or the vocabulary words in order to understand the histograms.